Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube, please feel free to like, subscribe, and add your comments. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please feel free to rate and review it. It really does help. And then wanted to just a quick shout out to today's broadcast is brought to you by our newest service called Next Placement, where we're bringing a more people-centric, empathetic approach to outplacement. So if you're an HR professional and you're faced with the task of having to transition colleagues from the company and are looking at providing career transition services, we'd really encourage you to take a look at Career Club and Next Placement. You can find more on this at career.club. I'm very excited about today's guest. He was recommended to me by a mutual friend, and as we got to know each other and I learned more about his body of work, Mike Foley really is doing some incredible things. So he's got a wonderful background, which I'm going to read mostly here because it's quite extensive. So Mike Foley is the founder and CEO of Clarity Central, a consulting firm specializing in communication skills. He's also a clinical assistant professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. His ability to connect with an audience by sharing insights and humorous stories has been at the core of his success as a corporate trainer and public speaker. Prior to Clarity Central, Mike was in the business development role at General Electric. He holds a BS in engineering, an MA in human development, and an MBA. In 2014, he's recognized by the National Speakers Association as a certified speaking professional, the highest international recognition for professional speakers. Suffice it to say, Mike Foley is a communications expert, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So with that, Mike, welcome.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I am doing fine. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So where do we find you today?
I'm back in Chicago. I've been traveling a lot, so just got back, and the weather is beautiful. Finally, summer's here, and boy, it's a long winter, but it's finally we've got the good weather today.
I was going to say Chicago tends to skip spring. It kind of goes from blizzards to blistering without much of a break in between.
I noticed that. I've been wearing my winter coat up until about a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, my goodness. So as is our want, we like to do just a little bit of an icebreaker to help people get to know you as a human being, not just a guru in all things communication. So very quickly, where were you born and raised?
I was actually born in California. My folks are originally from the East Coast, so we were out in California for 5 years, first 5 years of my life. Then we moved back to the East Coast, and then around high school, freshman year in high school, we moved to the Chicago area and been in the Midwest ever since.
Awesome. Very cool. And then just a little bit about your family.
Yeah, I come from a large Irish Catholic family. There was 6 of us, and everybody was telling stories all the time. And it was a very intuitive way to learn to speak and get your messages across. And if you didn't speak up, you just didn't have a place in that in my family of origin. So everybody was always trying to get the limelight. And I think through the years, through osmosis, I just figured out how to tell stories and to connect with other people via communication skills. And it was years later that I started studying exactly what I kind of picked up intuitively. So I kind of come from a background of big storytellers. So.
Well, this will be fun because I think, people would talk about the gift of gab and somehow like it's just a gift. And yet what we're going to talk about is, no, there's some structure to this. So there's definitely things that we can learn to be better.
We could do another podcast, Bob, on Blarney. So that's a whole nother.
I could do that by myself. I'm full of that. And then real quickly, I know that you've got a really interesting hobby and pastime that you're getting ready to go embark on here very shortly. Do you mind sharing with folks what that is?
Yeah. So, even by high school, growing up here in Chicago, my brother and I used to take our sunfish, which is like, a 10-foot, it's just basically a surfboard with a little cockpit. We used to go sailing on Lake Michigan. And I always had this thought, man, it would be so fun to cross an ocean someday. So, fast forward 40 years later, I depart June 6th from Portland. So a couple of weeks, we depart from Portland, Maine for the Azores, and then the Azores to Lisbon. And I've got a crew of 4, and we're all set up. And so it's been just a lifelong ambition of mine, and definitely needs some clear communication on board. So that does come in handy.
Yes. So super quick. So Portland, Maine to ultimately Lisbon, Portugal.
Actually, we'll stop in the Azores, which is part of Portugal. It's about 2/3 of the way across the ocean.
Okay.
So it about 2,000 miles. And then from the Azores to Lisbon, it's about another 900 miles.
Yikes. Okay. Well, thank you for the geography lesson along the way.
Yeah.
And about how long is that going to take you?
It's going to take us about 2.5 weeks for the first leg, and then just for 1 week for the second leg.
And then do you like resupply or whatever in the Azores, or can you make it all the way?
Yeah. So I kind of counted on fresh food for about the first week, and then we'll be working on canned and food and pop. So we'll be.
That's very cool. So to kind of jump into it, so you teach communication. I mean, it's your business at Clarity Central, and then you also teach this as an MBA level course at Kellogg, correct?
Correct. I was an engineer for a number of years for GE prior to getting involved in communication skills. And I just started noticing really, really smart people having a tough time articulating their ideas, my fellow engineers. And so I just started teaching communications courses at GE. I just did a couple, and they took off. And I thought, I really think there's a gap in the market for communication skills, real practical communication skills that people actually use. And so I started my own study on the topic. And it was just a few years later that I started my business, Clarity Central, and we've been going for 27 years now. And I didn't think I'd stay in communications. I just had no idea the depth of the need that was out there. So, I mean, it's every level can use it, and every function in an organization.
Well, let's just talk about that for half of a second, because on the one hand, it seems like just a super self-evident kind of thing, but it's not. And why, in your view, and what all you've learned in these past 25 plus years, why are communication skills so important? Why should people spend time investing in getting better at it?
I would say two things there, Bob. One is, over the years, I've defined professional power as in two ways. It's an equation. It's your intelligence, it's your vision, it's your business acumen, all of these things. So you got that piece, all of that. The other half of it, though, is your ability to get people on board with you, whether it's through, persuasion, motivation, inspiration, closing deals, selling products, services, ideas, collaborating. And you got to have both. When it comes down to it, the brilliant ideas, without this ability to get people, investors on board with you, without getting employees on board, without getting clients on board with that, your ideas aren't going to go anywhere. And so it's a very simple but very powerful equation. And you got to have both. If you're going to really move the needle in our culture, any culture for that matter, you have to have both. And I think people focus on the first with, not so much on the second. So we all know people that walk around with brilliant ideas, but they just can't quite make them a reality. So that's the gap in the market that I noticed. And I just thought, if I reverse engineered from that equation, what would I do to help people really enhance their communication skills so they could get more people on board with them? So I call that your professional power. And I think, a couple examples. One was Henry Ford, brilliant manufacturing process, right? He's pumping these things out. They're all black. There's no options, the Model Ts, right? The other side of the equation for him is he literally had to go out and persuade the horse and buggy crowd that this is a better buggy. And that's what he had to do. JFK, back in the 1960, he went to Congress with a pipe dream of sending a man to the moon in 10 years, all right? And he persuaded them to give him $9 billion, not million, billion in 1960. And he didn't see it, but they achieved that within the 10 years. So those are just a couple of examples of professional power. And there's endless examples. I mean, I could go on all day with different. I'll give you one more. So, Bill Gates. He, obviously a brilliant guy. His approach sometimes is a bit challenging, and so his pitch to IBM back in the day was rejected. They rejected his ideas. They said, thanks, Bill, but you can go. And as a result of that rejection, he started Microsoft, and he knew he would never have that other side of the equation. So what did he do? He hired his college roommate, Steve Ballmer, to be that sales face for Microsoft for all those years. So he knew he needed that balance. And so I think that's just something to consider. And, I always, when I put that assertion out there, I always say that I'm on pretty solid ground, because Warren Buffett says, invest in yourself. One easy way to be worth 50% more than you are in the marketplace is by investing in your communication skills. So I think, we're on the, if Warren Buffett's saying it, I think we're on safe ground.
You're probably on safe ground, yes. Yeah, it also reminds me of the book by Dan Pink, To Sell is Human, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about persuasion, to your earlier point.
It is.
Because, whether we're parents or we're fighting for budget or with our significant other or whatever the relationship is, we're always persuading, someone, and again, not in a manipulative kind of a way, but genuinely like, honey, I think this is best. Let me help you see why this might be in your best interest to do something. But in any event, one of the things that you've shown me is that we're fighting for attention, that we've got a very distracted audience, if you will. Could you talk a little bit about just sort of level set where people are in their ability to even receive communication these days?
Yeah, so great question, Bob. So, it all comes down to connecting on that human level, and, backing up to what you just said about it's not about manipulation. It is absolutely not about manipulation. People, people see when they're being manipulated, and it's just so that what I try to get across is we're doing the opposite of that. It is absolutely not about manipulation. So it is about understanding, like really understanding your audience, and then make it easy for them in a lot of different ways. So the first thing I would say is when I dove in and I was working with some of my teaching assistants to do some research on what's going on with people out there in the marketplace right now. It's amazing. It's worse. People are so overwhelmed that they can barely hold a thought. They can barely listen for them. I guess goldfish have an 8-second attention span. The average person has like 7 seconds. So, it's scary.
We aspire to be goldfish.
Yeah, exactly. So, distractions. So before COVID, we were on screens, according to, the Nielsen study. We were on screens like 10 hours a day. Post-COVID, we're on screens 14 hours a day. And I ask people, what's the first thing you look at in the morning? And they're like, my screen. And I'm like, what's the last thing at night? And they're like, my screen. So we're distracted by that. All day long, you've got 10,000 ideas coming at you every day. You turn on a website, you instantly have 15, 20 things popping at you. And by the end of the day, I always ask my class, have you noticed how exhausted you are, even though you've just been sitting at a desk? And the reason for that is we have 10,000 ideas coming at us every single day. So, I can go on with a bunch of statistics, but basically, people are overwhelmed and they're burned out and they just can't take anymore. So the question that I always pose to, my students is, if this is the reality, and we all agree at some level, because I show them all the statistics, how are you going to get through to people in 2023 if that is the reality?
Yes.
And I'm open to new ideas, Bob. And that's why I enjoy talking to you about this, because, anything to help people connect, given the amazing amount of information coming at people. How do you cut through that? And the one phrase that I really love is, communication is not what's said, it's what's heard. I'll say that again. Communication is not what's said, it's what's heard. So you can think of it like transmit and receive, and there's only communication if it goes through, if it connects. If it doesn't connect, there's no communication. And I always have fun with this. I say, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, how many people here have had a discussion with a significant other where you walk away from the conversation thinking they heard something totally different from what I just said. And that's communication is not what's said. Something else is being heard. So that then the question is, well, what's the answer? How do you connect? And I would say, I really stop my class in their tracks when I say this. I say, this class has nothing to do with you. This class has everything, and I mean everything, to do with your audience. So if we work backward from what's most important for the audience, what does the audience really want from us? That is going to make all the difference in the world, especially given all of the distractions and the stress that people are under. So I say my answer to it is make it easy for people. How can you make it so easy for people to take in your information? And if you can do that, you're a breath of fresh air. And if you don't do that, you're just like everyone else trying to vie for somebody's attention when they've got 10,000 ideas coming at them.
And you can correct me on this one. As you're talking, Mike, what kind of occurs to me is like if you just did a random survey and said, hey, which organ of your body do you think is most important for communication? People would probably say the mouth, right? Because you're talking. And as you're going through this, what it makes me, it's like, no, first it's your heart. Show me you actually care. The way that you can show me that you care is with your ears, by listening. And then you're in a position to be able to connect with somebody because, to your point, you're now empathetic to where they're coming from. There's some demonstration of I actually care about what you need, not what I'm trying to do. And then people, the field has been prepared to be sown.
Spot on, Bob. Spot on. And I would say, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the listening courses that I've taken over the years because you don't remember them, and there's some gimmicks and techniques. What I have found, Bob, is being curious. When you said care, curiosity is caring. If you think about it, you're taking all of your energy to try to. So say that again. Can you help me understand? And so what I say is, if you want to become a great listener, get very curious. Like, hey, back up. Tell me about your business. Really? No kidding. And what else is going on? And by getting curious, you're naturally going to listen very deeply of what's going on. And then when you do go to speak, you've developed credibility with the person. They get that you genuinely are trying to understand where their point of view. And then they're much more likely to listen. And then you can apply some of the things that we do go through in the course, like being organized and proving your points with evidence, and you weave those things in to make it easy for them to get on board with you. Then you're hitting on all cylinders, in my opinion.
Well, and what I love about what you're saying, Mike, with the curiosity is there's an inherent authenticity, a genuineness to that.
Can't fake that.
You can't fake this stuff. And so for anybody that's looking for a quick fix on how to just like, how can I like pretend like I care?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but I've never encountered it, and I hope I never do.
Bob, how many times, we both been in the sales field for years. So how many times have we been in situations where, the person asks 5 discovery questions, right? And they're not even recording it. Like they might write something down, but they're going to give you the same pitch regardless of your responses. And it's that inauthenticity that we pick right up on. And we're just like, they lose all credibility, in my opinion, in that moment, because they're just making me feel better that they asked me 5 discovery questions. They're not really genuinely curious about where I'm coming from.
Right. That is true. All right. So we've established that people are distracted and busy and overwhelmed with a ton of information, guilty as charged. Then, if we want to unlock that door, though, and have, some chance of being heard, what we're saying is the first key is be genuinely curious, listen, ask questions, demonstrate, that you've got a genuine interest in the other person. Assuming that foundation has been laid, how can you start walking us through a model that isn't just, oh, he's glib, she's got a silver tongue, but there's actually a method behind the madness to being a communicator?
Yeah, absolutely. Just finishing up with the curiosity part, Bob, I would say you can think of a few questions to get the conversation started, obviously, but if you're really curious and you're really listening, my next question is in your answer. And I pick up something that's interesting to me and I throw that back, and it creates for a very natural conversation. And does that make sense?
No, 100%, because I think the antithesis, and is pretty well acknowledged, is most people are sort of forming their next question while you're talking. So they're actually not listening to what you're saying. They're formulating their next statement, whether it's a question or a sentence.
Exactly. So that's how you get the conversation rolling. And then I would say, going back to Socrates and Aristotle, and the philosophers, they all stated that, we think in terms of threes. So it's major premise, minor premise, conclusion, logic 101. Syllogisms, it's before, during, after, beginning, middle, end, intro, body, conclusion. So the rule of three, at a very fundamental level, is a wonderful way to segment your ideas if you're trying to articulate your ideas in a very clear and concise way. I wouldn't recommend talking like that all the time, but when you really want to bring it, and I say, answer simple questions with just blurt out your answers or just be authentic. But when you really want to bring it and you really want to organize yourself for a more complex answer, the rule of three is a very, very powerful tool. And it's everywhere in our culture, from sports to entertainment to everyday life. You see it everywhere. Every single one of Steve Jobs' presentations that books are written about, he uses the rule of three. So if you can organize yourself a little bit, that makes it easy for us as an audience to track with you. So I would say that's just one way of organizing. Another is opposites, compare, contrast. You already used it once, Bob. So on one hand, on the other hand, that's a wonderful way to segment ideas. So if you can organize it, people, once again, it just makes for people to it's easier for them to track with you.
So Mike, on the rule of three, in Career Club, we have a weekly call with all of our members. And this last week, we were talking about networking. And we had a guest that came in, and she used the acronym AIR, AIR, to give people just a very easy model on how to network, where it was advice, insight, recommendations. So when you're networking with somebody and I need a framework to sort of structure this call, she was saying, well, the idea is to either ask them for advice, for an insight, or a recommendation. And she put that under the acronym of AIR, and everybody just instantly gravitated to it and started repeating it back to her, because she just organized it into three easy buckets that people instantly grasped.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, there's so many benefits on so many levels. A, it's super easy for us to do. B, it's super nice for the audience to be able to track with you when you segment ideas like that, because the last thing we want as an audience is a stream of consciousness where we just don't know where the beginning, middle, or end is. So those are just a couple of reasons, as I'm using it right now, why it is helpful. It just makes it easy. I just keep coming back to make it easy for the audience. And the rule of three is definitely something like that. I would say one other thing with that, and that is it's a loose structure. It's not a rigid thing, or it's not a 20 points. So within the structure, there's enough room for you to be improvisational, tell a story, go off on an example, talk about something, and then you come back to. And secondly, so it's a very natural way of speaking and being organized and helping your audience track with you.
Yeah, well, if I could be empathetic, you even confirmed some of this for me when we were speaking previously. That's how I do these podcasts, is kind of in some basic chunky areas, but with freedom to move about. Because if it's overly scripted, I actually can't hear you because I'm too worried about following the script.
Yep. Absolutely, Bob. And in fact, that's one of the biggest I would say that is the biggest challenge I have with my students in the MBA program and with, out there in the industry, is people are so attached to perfectionism that they memorize their talks word for word. They might get through the talk, but you're not going to have that human connection. So I always say, there's neuroscience behind what we're talking about. And so Bob, when you're saying you're memorized or you're reading, has anybody ever had a presentation read to them, and it's just a nightmare? And so when you're doing that, the synapses in your brain are firing here, and you can't connect with your audience very well. However, on the other hand, when you're just over in this part of your brain, which the synapses are firing when you're just connecting with all sorts of people, but you're not necessarily, you're just kind of winging it. So we don't like that either. If somebody's just winging it completely versus somebody being very rote. So what's the answer? The answer is a combination, which is what you're talking about, Bob, is a loose structure, but within the context of that structure, go off on tangents, be yourself, be authentic, just talk how you're talking and, like you normally talk, but do it within something that's easy for us to track. That's the trick, the middle path, so to speak.